Hey, what's up? Jeff Lerner here. And if you've seen a lot of my videos or any of my videos, you know that I'm all about living an awesome life and ways to live an awesome life. And a lot of times that relates to business or marketing or sales or internet technology. But today we're going to take a little different approach. I'm going to tell you why you and everyone should learn to play an instrument. I'm going to give you 5 reasons why it will do things for you that nothing else could do. Okay, welcome, Jeff Lerner here. So if you know my story, you know that before I was an entrepreneur and any kind of internet marketing guy, I was a jazz musician, right? I spent about a decade in my 20s. I guess we all spent about a decade in our 20s. But in my case, the decade of my 20s was primarily spent as a professional musician. That's what I went to school for and what I did for a living. And frankly, when I loved it. It was great. It was creative. It was fun. It was cool. I did a lot of fun things. I met a lot of cool people, but I was like pretty poor the whole time. And eventually I got so poor that it was unsustainable. And I switched to a different keyboard and started teaching myself internet business. And that's kind of the story extends from there. But I am so grateful. I am eternally grateful for my training in music. And frankly, when a lot of people ask me how I learned to become an entrepreneur, I really do credit my experience as a musician, and I want to kind of explain why I say that and what I think it is that learning, in particular, not just learning music theoretically, but learning to play an instrument, what it does for a person that empowers them and can help them be successful in anything they do in life. And I will say that this is not just my experience. So back in my 20s, not only did I play, but because it's hard to make enough money just playing to live a decent life, I also supplemented my income by teaching piano lessons, which means I had an opportunity to observe over the course of several years hundreds and hundreds of kids. I can tell you with absolute, scientific certainty, right? It's as if I was a lab scientist who did this as a formal experiment. I couldn't be more certain about this. Kids that have the discipline and the ability to apply themselves over time consistently to learn an instrument end up being more successful kids. They end up being more successful in school. They end up being more successful in their future careers. They end up having better home lives. It's literally sanity, and it's sanity promoting and like future prosperity producing. I have my reasons, and I'll explain to you what I think those are. But if you've ever heard of the Stanford marshmallow experiment, and if you haven't, you should Google it, unless you're a really erratic person that's got impulse control issues and no sense of delayed gratification. In that case, don't Google the Stanford marshmallow experiment, or you'll just get really depressed about your life prospects. But no, really check it out, because it's basically how they figured out with more certainty than any other experimental model they've ever come up with, how they could predict kids' future. And it all comes down to whether or not kids have a sense of delayed gratification. Are you willing to do a hard thing now, which in the case of the experiment was not eat the marshmallow that's right in front of you, so that you can have an even better thing later, which in the case of the experiment was a second marshmallow in like 10 or 15 minutes. Something that simple literally determined so much about a kid's future. Whether or not they'd go to jail, whether or not they'd be able to hold a job, whether or not they'd get divorced, even whether or not they'd develop like chronic illnesses. Well, I would say that my experience of teaching kids piano lessons, and adults, by the way, I also taught a lot of adult students who were adults who didn't stick with it when they were kids and decided they wanted to come back to it when they were adults. And guess what? You don't really change a lot of people, and they didn't stick with it as adults either, and they ended up frustrated and quitting. But anyway, the point is that was my marshmallow experiment, where people that can consistently apply themselves to learning an instrument, and I don't know if it's chicken or the egg, I suspect it's a little of both. They innately have qualities that will lead to success in life, and they are simultaneously developing in themselves qualities that will lead to success in life. So let's talk about what I think those qualities are. First of all, there's kind of a myth that's, if you've ever seen like a movie like Amadeus or Immortal Beloved, or documentaries about rock musicians or whatever, there's sort of this myth that like musicians are wild and crazy and insane. insane, tend towards insanity, right? I would argue that that's more like celebrity makes people insane. I don't think it's music that makes people insane. I would say that musicians, most of the musicians I know, tend to be a very measurable and obvious combination of intelligent and clear thinking. Musicians do things with their brain, and they learn to do things with their brain that involve basically managing such large amounts of information and such relatively complex models. Almost, I would compare really high-level musicianship to almost like organic chemistry in terms of the complexity of all the relationships and the processes that are happening in real time. This is the key. They have to learn how to be processing and managing that much information at once and still pass it off as a communication. Pass it off as something that looks graceful and elegant or passionate or whatever, essentially that's emotive, right? That's emotional and has a quality that goes beyond the data and beyond the math and beyond the numbers. But there is so much data processing happening in the practice of music. And if you've ever tried to learn an instrument, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Musicians are smart, and music makes you smart. And then look, if you end up being the most famous musician in the world, you might also end up being crazy. But it's not the music that made you that way. It's the celebrity and the excess and the lack of boundary. The next attribute of music that I think is so essential to development is, and this might be a little woo-woo for some people, but when you really think about what music is about managing tension in relationships to create a certain effect, which generally the effect that you're trying to create is harmony, right? Something that feels and sounds pleasing to another person. Isn't that sort of what life is? Isn't that sort of what sales is? Isn't that sort of what business is? And let's say you run a company and you're trying to build a team, is you have to manage tension to create a desired feeling and a desired behavior and an effect. You can't have a tensionless workplace, or else nobody will get anything done. You can't have a workplace with no urgency, no deadlines, nothing looming. But you can't have such an overly tense, stressful workplace that everybody's exhausted, they don't want to do their thing. That would be like having a piece of music where the chords, it was all dissonance and the chords never resolved. It's about that balance. And to me, I think that's a great paradigm for life. And I'm not just saying this abstractly. I literally think about this all the time. Like I have this sense of, okay, I've pushed hard enough, it's time to resolve this tension. And, frankly, those instincts seem to be pretty good. And I think a lot of it traces back to music. Okay, now that last thing I said was maybe going to be a little bit woo-woo. This next point might be even more woo-woo or too woo-woo for some people. But by the way, note to self, look up woo-woo and make sure I'm actually using that term correctly, or that it's even a real term. What I mean is like existential and cosmic and woo-woo, right? So what music is at a scientific level is it's about pitch relationships, right? Which have to do with frequency, the frequency of sound. Like the speed that the sound wave goes determines what pitch you hear. And when you have a sound going, let's say the sound waves are this wide, and then you have another sound on top of it where the waves are exactly half as long, then that sound, the pitch that you hear, is going to be 1 octave higher. That would be an octave consonance, right? It would be 2 sound waves, one of which is traveling twice as fast as the other. That's the science. That's the sonics of music. But there is this beautiful elegance to the science, and where I swear, the more you dig into music, and particularly what I was just talking about, which is called the overtone series, which is what happens when you double frequency, triple frequency, quadruple frequency. And the reason I'm doing this is because there's 2 ways to double frequency. You can either vibrate the string or double the pitch, either vibrate the string twice as fast or cut the length of the string in half and vibrate it at the same speed. That's why when you fret a guitar, if you want to go up an octave, you move exactly halfway up the length of the string to the 12th fret, right? And then if you want to go up a 5th, you cut it to a 3rd. And then if you want to go up to the next octave, you cut it down to a 1/4. And so every fractional increment of reducing a string length or increasing speed of vibration results in triggering the next frequency in the overtone series, which is literally all the notes of the scale. Like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Those notes are determined by these mathematical relationships that I'm talking about. Now, so that in and of itself is super trippy, right? But get this. At an atomic level, if you actually look at an atomic structure, under a nuclear electron microscope, right? Something where you can actually see atoms. So you probably remember from science class that you have the nucleus and then you have these electrons that go around the atoms, right? Well, so the electrons, they're kind of like the solar system with the sun and the planets. The electrons move in these somewhat relatively circular orbits. And I don't want to get above my scientific pay grade here, but at least I think we're all familiar with the concept of the nucleus and the electrons that swirl around it, right? And they swirl in these rings, the orbital rings that are basically concentric to the nucleus of the atom. So if you measure the intervals between the spacing of the electron rings, it actually lines up with the same mathematical relationships as the string lengths in the overtone series. So literally, when people say, why does music make me feel a certain way? Why is it that these notes played together make me feel, and these notes played together make me feel, right? The dissonance versus consonance, harmony versus tension, right? Why is that? Well, I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you that the same thing is happening in every single molecule in your body at an atomic level. There are these same relationships, and the vibrational, if you get into quantum mechanics and they start trying to measure where the subatomic particles are, they're all vibrating. It's all about frequencies and intervals, whether you're at an atomic level, you're at a music level, you're at an auditory level. What happens when the pitches hit your eardrum and it goes into the brain and you start to have feelings? How does that whole process work? I don't think anybody understands. But tell me there's not something spiritual about it. Tell me it's not where science and spirituality converge. And you want to get in touch with that? Learn to play an instrument. Learn to create those sounds through your body, through the mechanics of your body, channeled through an instrument that actually create that impact and those feelings in other people. It'll put you in touch with something that I don't think there's any other way to get in touch with. That's why even meditation hinges around vibration. It's creating vibration around a solid monotone frequency, right? Meditation itself involves creating a resonant sound, just like you would hitting one low note on a piano. Next, I think there's something so essential, especially in the world that we live in, about being productive and creative in a currency or in a model, in a transactional model that involves even other people that doesn't have anything to do with money. I think we have a tendency in the world we live in to always quantify and boil things down to value exchange, money. And look, I'm an entrepreneur. Like, I place a value on every unit of time in my life, which is probably why I love this aspect of music so much, because it's a release, it's a catharsis, it's a way for me to get out of the entrepreneurial capitalistic mindset that, although I think is essential, and I think it's the agent of more progress than we've ever had in the centuries long history of our civilization. It's like, I'm not knocking it at all, but God, isn't it nice to have a place where you can go to create something where nobody's saying, well, what is that worth? Or was that a waste of time? And I think that production in a non-financial currency, which is how I think about it. In other words, I can make somebody happy by buying them a gift, but to be able to make somebody happy by playing them a song that takes them back to their childhood and makes them feel something they haven't felt in 10 or 20 years, you can't even put a value on that, right? It's super value. It's beyond placing a value. I think that's something pretty cool, that we would probably have a better world if everybody at a cellular level understood what I'm talking about tapping into something of which the value is completely non-monetary. And then finally, and this is just true of music, it's true of working out, it's true of building a business, it's true of building a great marriage, it's true of raising kids. There's just so much value in doing hard things. We live in a world of comfort. Like, everything is an upcharge for comfort. People are so willing to pay a few extra pennies for comfort. And there is something actually really special and wonderful about being uncomfortable and making yourself uncomfortable on a consistent basis, and it's evolutionary, right? What is adaptation? What is growth? It's response to stimulus that challenges us. You break down a muscle to build it back up. You wear yourself out so that you can get sleep and repair. You do hard things on a repetitive, recurring basis to train your mind to make yourself stronger. And there are not a lot of things that are harder at a cognitive level and at a behavioral level in terms of developing good habits than doing what it takes to really, really learn an instrument. In the spirit of how you do one thing is how you do everything. If you do this one thing and learn an instrument, you will see a ripple effect into so many areas of your life you can't imagine, because you will naturally be becoming a person who's very comfortable doing hard things. So those are my 5 reasons. I could probably come up with more, but I don't know why I looked at my watch. I'm not running a timer, but the video is probably gone long enough. That's my point. So hey, if you're into this stuff, if you're into having an awesome life, if you're into like things you can actually do to make your quality of life more awesome, then you'll probably like some of my other videos too, and you'll probably want to be notified when new ones come out. So subscribe to my channel. Go ahead and click the bell, the little bell on the subscribe button, or by the subscribe button, so that you get notified when new videos get released. And I will keep bringing you content about how to have an awesome life. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.